Now, a student's transition from the structured environment of high school to the autonomy of tertiary education in 2026 and obviously beyond, the stakes have never been higher. With South African universities reporting first-year dropout rates as high as 50 to 60%, preparation has shifted from simple enrolment to a rigorous process of holistic readiness. So let's talk about this with parenting coach Ayanda Tetyana and education psychologist Terry Oakley-Smith. Terry joins us via our video link, and Ayanda in studio. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So let's talk about the complexities. I mean, it's a great process. There's a lot of excitement. You've just graduated. You've done phenomenally well in your matric, and you're getting ready for university. Your parents ship you off. Sometimes they will go with you, but in most instances, you go off on your own as an 18 or 19-year-old, and you explore the real world. What are some of the challenges that you're likely to face?
Sure. So I just want to say this. So some of the challenges that we face is that in our home environments, we do tend to hold a bit tight when it comes to parenting our children. So in the navigation or in the transition, in some instances, it is a bit tricky for the children to have to deal with coming to just the whole environment of now being in a whole world of a university or tertiary institution where there's not a lot of structure and there's not a lot of accountability if we have not trained our children or prepared them in the home so that they can almost have that almost like as a system of just being able to understand what they need to do. It's very important that as parents, early on, as early as high school, we start being very intentional about preparing our children to start being accountable and learning how to manage their own schedules, because then it's not as overwhelming and as anxiety bringing compared to that. So whether it's just figuring out the system of the tertiary institution, whether it's figuring out your own actual study schedule, knowing when you're actually you're struggling with a particular subject and who to ask for help. Those are like kind of like the serious issues that some of our children are dealing with. And it helps if our children are able to notice that, listen, I need help here, and know where to go ask for that.
Terry, you're going to bring you into the conversation. Now, Ayanda talked about mollycoddling, if you will. So almost an overbearing or protection of our children. And some of us raise our kids in a particular way, right? Now, they go off to university and surprise, surprise, right? Not everyone is polite. Not everyone is kind, for that matter. How do we prepare our kids for that which may be unforeseen?
Yes, because I think that, as was already indicated, the social environment at the university is going to be very different from that in the home, and obviously far more diverse than that experienced by most South African children, rather sadly still. I think the other thing that's really quite important is that many of our schools are not able to prepare children adequately in terms of choosing the courses, what they're actually going to study at university. And that can obviously be problematic because children can find themselves in an environment studying a course for which they really feel disinterested, possibly ill-prepared. So I think it's very important that children understand the importance of attending the orientation at the university, which almost all the universities that I've worked in go to great lengths to orientate new students, to help them understand what's available, who's available, where to go if they need help. They understand, for example, the clinic facilities at the university, the educational advice that they can get, what to do if things go wrong. And again, if they're going to be in residence, it would be very important for them to understand as well the orientation in the residences. But I think being open, being ready for almost anything. And I think exactly as your previous speaker said, those children that come from environments, where they're really taught and scheduled, and they haven't got a lot of personal freedom, are going to find it more difficult. So the preparation should exactly, and I agree, involve allowing children in high school, perhaps from grade 10 upwards, have a greater role in the way they schedule their own life, choose their own friends, spend their own time, etc.
So Anna, let's pick up on what Terry's just talked about. And what comes to mind is anxiety, loneliness, imposter syndrome. And that's because sometimes you pick the wrong friends, right? Or you don't find friends, right? And you're all on your own. How do you manage? How do you cope with that? How do you prepare for that?
Sure. So it's the same. I will always go back to our parenting and our home environments. So even as we as parents are actually going through our own life, it's very important that we actually ensure that we are discussing things with our children in terms of just the emotional vocabulary. So let's say, for instance, you have a child now who's met this a teenager who's met a friend, and maybe they start doing things, experimenting with things that your child may not be used to. Being able to emotionally regulate and say, you know what, I'm not sure if I like doing that. I'm not comfortable with that. And being able to find an adult to speak to is very important in that setting. Because if then your child is someone who's a people pleaser, who's someone who just wants to try everything, and we all know how bad peer pressure is at that age, right? We were all teenagers. We tried a lot of stuff. So you want to be able to have prepped your child in terms of just the emotional intelligence so that they can be able to measure themselves and say, you know what, maybe I'm doing a little too much here, or I've tried something out and listen, that did not work out. Let's say there's counseling at school.
I'd like to shift focus, and the reason I'm going to do that is because the ideal scenario is where a kid goes to university and they're coming from a nuclear family or a structured family, if you will. But so many kids who are brilliant are coming from broken homes where they don't have the support that we're talking about, or this structure, or kids that are coming from rural South Africa and they're leaving Ugogo to go to university, right? So all of a sudden, you're the first one in the clan to go to university, and this process doesn't actually occur. So let's start off with, what do you do as an individual, right, if you have not been readied for your first day at university?
Sure, it's going to be hard because unfortunately you have to make some of the mistakes, especially if you're not emotionally regulated. And the nice thing is that in many institutions, there are type of mentoring programs, there are some type of orientation that you can then enroll yourself in. Look for a role model. You know, some of these institution lecturers are really lovely in terms of just mentoring you. The reality is, if you're coming from a situation where you do not have someone who can support you on this academic reality that you're now in, you're not going to be able to look for support, to look for comfort, to look for mentorship. This says to you as an individual, now you need to find someone new.
Terry, what are those things that young men and women that are going into university for the first time need to look out for? I mean, what's the stuff that your parents might not have told you, or in your experience, that shock the system?
You know, I think that for many of our young people, they're going to be the first in their families to ever go to university. So they're going to arrive at the university without somebody at home who can really tell them what to expect. So the shocks are going to be, first of all, the diversity. They may have been at a rural school where all of the children, or the vast majority of children, look just like them. They've never experienced learning with and socializing with children of other racial groups. So that can be quite a shock. The freedom that one has as well in order to set one's own timetable. I mean, it's possible to go to university and do absolutely nothing for the first couple of months, not attend any lectures, not hand in any essays. So that amount of freedom is really important to negotiate. And what I want to say to parents is that even if they didn't have the opportunity because of apartheid and post-apartheid and poverty to go to a university themselves, the rules that they make in their own home and how they bring up their own children can stand them in enormously good stead once they get to university. understanding that they're responsible for their own emotional life, understanding how they deal with the possibility of the sexual freedom that university provides. You know, all of these things are obviously very enticing the first time round. And sometimes those parents that haven't had a chance to go to university feel inadequately equipped to guide their children, whereas in fact, it doesn't take money to be a good parent. Sometimes those children that have money, those parents that have money don't spend nearly enough time with their children. They give them things. They give them the best iPad, the best iPhone, you know, the best clothes, the smartest tackies. Whereas the child that's coming from a poorer home may have far more time to talk to their children and to explain to them what to expect. So I think that relationship between the family and the parents, the family or the parents and the child, is very key in the child being able to adjust adequately to this world of diversity, sexual freedom, and educational freedom to some extent.
Ayanda, I go years back as a 16-year-old and then a 26-year-old getting scammed, right, by scammers. And I thought I was pretty smart, right? Now, there's potentially a lot of scamming that could go on, whether it's accommodation scams, deals, loan traps, etc., etc. What's your advice as we wrap on those sort of issues?
You know, there's so much you can prepare for, really. So it's going to be part of the experience in reality.
Well, go there, get scammed and learn.
You know, it takes burning your fingers to learn in certain instances. There's not a lot that we can do. But what's really important in terms of just your own identity as an individual is to lean towards the values that your parents have taught you, because these opportunities and these freedoms are just going to be almost a free-for-all, but it's going to be chaotic if you don't manage it. And us as parents have a responsibility to talk to our children about how nice it is to have good things, but to have them at a good time. So during university, if you focus on learning and focus on keeping ourselves in terms of those values, and then later on when we have all the money and then we can explore and can have and in many instances, our children who are coming from really impoverished situations, it's even more urgent to focus on those issues that we want to focus on in terms of just education, so that we can come back and contribute to our families. We need to be very intentional about having those conversations with our children about how important, in terms of them being the first maybe degree holders in their families, and how they're going to change and have an impact on it. So it's a huge weight for them, but it's a responsibility that, should they manage well, in the long run, they can drink as much as they want, responsibly get an Uber home because they have all the monies and they can afford such things. So it's not to say...
Can I add something about scamming, Hugo?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah, I thought you were going to react to drink as much as they want. But anyhow, let's focus on the scamming.
No, I just wanted to say we have a huge problem in South Africa with gambling, with underage gambling. And I heard a story recently of a student who'd gone to university, got his NSFAS loan and gambled it all away. And I think that one of the scams we should be really careful with is that of gambling. There's so much advertising for it everywhere. It looks so very easy, and it can result in huge heartbreak. You can imagine if families have scraped together enough resources to send their child off to university, he gets the NSFAS or she gets the NSFAS and immediately spends it all in the hope that she will be successful gambling. That can be a real problem. I don't know what my colleague thinks of that, but I've heard so many stories that are so shocking about students and gambling.
Terry, as we wrap the conversation, just your thoughts on how do our children keep safe at university? Because it's every parent's worry, it's every guardian's worry that my little boy or my little girl will go and return in one piece.
Yes, I mean, I think that most universities themselves are quite conscious of the need to keep students safe in residences, in lecture halls and so on. But I think unless the child themselves from their family has learned the importance of behaving in a way that keeps him or her safe, it can't ultimately be the responsibility of the university. So, for example, if the university has rules about students coming back to the residence at a certain time at night, that's obviously for the safety and security of the boy or girl concerned. But if these rules are broken and young children go out, first-year students get themselves into trouble, drink too much, get pregnant, which they don't intend to do, then, that can't be the fault of the university. I think learning personal independence, having psychological safety within, which comes from the home, firstly, and the university tries to support, is really important. Looking after yourself, putting yourself first, not trying to always just be one of the crowd.
I think we almost have to have an entire class on getting ready for university. Terry Oakley-Smith,
Yes.
educational psychologist. Appreciate your time this morning. Ayanda Tetyana, parenting coach. Thanks so much for coming into the studio.
My pleasure.
And that's where we leave that conversation. So, if your kids are going to university, you need to do a lot to prepare them. In a moment, though,